and then do your thing that's working.
Okay, even better. Thank you. Right.
You know, you see that analogy, you know, made it look good, made it, you know.
Welcome. So can I do the thing real quick where I ask everybody to raise their hands if they're either a developer, a designer, or a student, and you're free to raise your hands for 1, 2, 3, or none of them. Okay, thank you. Perfect. Now, who's a developer here? Designer, or a marketing person, or something else?
I'm something else.
Something else. What are you?
I'm a faculty member.
Okay, so you're not quite a student at all. You're the opposite of a student. Okay, cool. And the students are in the house here. Okay, cool. Architect, we'll put that under developer. See, this we're already encountering pitfalls in this talk that we're going to prove the futility and impossibility of what I'm going to try to talk about. Okay, lesson 1. So my name is Mark Henderson. I am by no means an ethicist or a philosopher. I am an armchair, one of both of those things, but I do enjoy the discourse and the conversation about this stuff, and I do enjoy trying to tackle some of these problems. And in order to do that, it needs to be a collaborative. Ideas are both encouraged and extremely challenged to the point where they are perfect, which will never happen. But we're going to try. Yeah. You know, I'm going to try 2 different things here. I'm going to try to interrupt and interject as we go along. But if you feel that that's not your jam, then go there and ask a question anonymously, and I'll try to just kind of address it as I go through my talk. Google's like, are you sure? Yes. Okay. Yep. All right. So we're going to start with some warm-up exercises here. We're going to get our brains moving because a big piece of ethics and a big piece of philosophy is just critical thinking in general and trying to truly exercise critical thinking. And the thing about that is that if you think that you're good at critical thinking, then you're wrong. Then you need to think more because this stuff is really, really difficult. So we'll start with an easy one. Who's heard of the trolley problem? Good. Okay, so you're on a track and there's a runaway trolley running down the track and there's a split. On this side, there is a family of 5 people that you just know are done for if the trolley goes along its path. There's a switch next to you that you're allowed to pull that will change the path of the trolley and hit a worker that's on the other side. What do you do? What's the right thing to do? And I'll make this easy for you ethically and say that most people say they're going to flip the switch. Utilitarianism, where you say, well, 1 is less than 5, therefore it's better. And each round, this exercise is given in rounds. So that's the first round, and that's kind of arguably the easy one. But then the next round, you're on a bridge. Instead of a switch, you're standing on a bridge, and in front of you stands, let's say, a human being with a large mass, for whatever reason. That you could push this person in front of the trolley, their mass would stop the trolley. It's still the same calculus, it's still the same number of lives, but it's a little different, isn't it? It's you taking a very active role in the thing instead of having a layer of abstraction between you and the action via the switch. And each time you go through that, it becomes more and more complex. And I'd say until about 5 years ago, I even consider that like applicable to our field. We say, well, we're just making apps for people to share pictures of their cats and stuff. Like, why are we talking about trolleys? I make trolleys for cats. Yeah. Okay, so then we get into another problem with something called the Chinese room, which is an example of a black box architecture. So you come with some English text. This is before Google Translate was invented. With some English text, and then you feed it in, and out comes perfect Chinese text, a perfect Chinese translation. When you open up the box, you see that there's not a sophisticated machine in there. What there is a human being who has no concept of the Chinese language, but has a book next to them that has complex instructions that they follow to the letter on how to translate English to Chinese. Is that a smart system? Is that effective? Does it work? Like, those are the next questions that come out of that. And that's been debunked by saying, well, what if the room itself is an autonomous sentient being? And we're like, well, we haven't invented those yet. We're like a year away now, but and then there's something called Wittgenstein's Beetles. Which awesome. Everybody's given a box in this room, and inside of it is something called a beetle. But we're not allowed to compare the beetles. We're only allowed to talk about the qualities of the beetle to each other. And by that exercise, we will have some idea of what it is, but we won't be able to know if ours is the same as anybody else. Maybe you got baked with your friends and you're like, is the color red the same color that I see? Is that the same thing? Like, that's the same kind of question, but this is a much more robust philosophical description of that. And I'm sorry for whatever I'm going to say in the next 40 minutes. I'm just going to apologize in advance. And then finally, we come to the hard problem of consciousness, which is simply consciousness a byproduct of information processing or not? And since the experience of consciousness is entirely subjective based on our own Beetles per se, there's almost no way to tell. Like, and that's another one where it's like, how do I know that this isn't the Truman Show and you guys are all just actors playing something, or I just made all of you up? There's solipsism, which is like the world only exists in my head. If you believe that. So, why am I talking about this stuff? I'd say until when I was about 26, 27, a person that felt like something was odd in my life. I was working for like a digital marketing company or doing consulting here and there, and just feeling like, I need to do something else. I need to move on. So I went and I joined AmeriCorps, which is the domestic version of the Peace Corps. I ended up going to Crow Creek, which is the short term for the Crow Creek Sioux Indian Reservation, which was by impoverished county in Massachusetts. I was just like, I don't really do anything not extreme, I guess. So I just really wanted to just jump right in. I ended up working for a Boys and Girls Club there, and I was like, oh, this is going to be great. I'm going to take a break from technology, all this stuff. And the first thing, they're like, oh, good, you can make us a website, and you can start doing all these things. So if I didn't leave and get married and have children, I would probably have joined the Occupy movement. I'm that type of person. I probably would have been at the No DAPL protests. I didn't. And instead, I came back with a sort of, I'd say before I had a very typical kind of, I'm gonna use the term like liberal or left wing viewpoint on things, and now I would say I have a very more like focused and refined, and just through that experience came out of that with a not a different, but just a more whatever. That is to say that this talk is. This is like an Ethics 201 talk. Again, I'm not like, a lot of people are going to hear what I'm going to say, and I've talked to people about this, and they've come and they've said, oh, that's just like Uncle Ben in Spider-Man when he says that with great power comes great responsibility. And I'm like, yeah, but that's like catching the surface of what we're really talking about. So I'm like a little bit further into the surface. And again, not an expert on any of this stuff. That's all I wanted to say. The topic of rights versus responsibilities is something really important that is completely misunderstood and completely almost paved over. It's middle school civics, and we're still making mistakes in the discourse about that stuff. Like if somebody gets banned from a social network, you'll hear people piping up about free speech, and you're like, this has nothing to do with the First Amendment. This is much more about this person was given the right to, given a platform and didn't obey the club rules, or, you know, in the case of something, got kicked out of the club. And that's just our society. That's just what it's something called the social contract. We all say, okay, we get the protections of this, and there's responsibilities involved in what we do. Given that a lot of people in this room are going to either have skills, either already have skills that put you so far ahead of everybody else in the world, or you're going to learn to have skills that do that, namely the technological skills or the capacity to work inside of an organization that can make these goals. We are coming out of this with a lot of responsibilities, and I'll get into the specifics of what each one of those are. And without just taking that step and thinking about that, you know, we're losing out on that type of thing. 201, I just got the question, what does 201 mean? 201 is just a joke. Like, you'll have college classes that are ranked like 100, 200 level classes, and I'm just being self-deprecating and saying, this is like a sophomore level class. I'm not a professor or anything like that. That I will get to. Why are we doing this? Because we have power and we don't know how to wield it. Like, this is a big problem, is that we don't even discuss how to wield power, and especially things like the cyberpunk manifesto or the cyberspace manifesto and things like that. Those are all ideas about how to live outside of power and how to live outside of politics. There's an argument to be made that that's unavoidable, and we're going to have to wield power and wield ethical power at some point. And without a focus and without a framework on how to do that, it's just like, you know, it's like spraying a submachine gun just into the air with what you can do. Yes?
Isn't power normally the use of power normally abused eventually? And that's what. Yeah.
That's a yeah, like absolute power corrupts, absolutely. And yeah, there is an argument to have, if you have an ethical framework, you have a third-party document that you can go and refer to and say, yeah, that might solve our short-term problem, what you're proposing, whatever crazy, powerful, maniacal thing that is. But we have this rule book here that we all kind of agree to follow, that just, let's not do that. Let's do that other thing. And a lot of this is preventing you from making a choice, so that you have to stop and think about it and say, well, I can't do that. Do this other thing. You know, because also just not being ethical degrades you as a human. And that's just, it's not about how you're affecting society or even your small group. It's just you. Like, who watches Westworld here? Anybody? Yeah, I mean, there's just rampant abuse that goes on to those androids, and the people that walk away from that, like the tourists there, are not going to themselves later honestly and saying, I'm really glad I did that. That was an awesome idea, and I feel so much better now. You know, within each choice that you make, there's just a cost that you have, that you incur. And then, because we're blind to it too, because there's so many indicators, there's so many choices that we have to make on a daily basis, down to what products we buy, down to what ride-sharing service we use, if any, or a taxi or a bus, or, you know, any of those things have costs. Being unethical, you can't escape making a decision unless you really just submit to a much crappier life. You know, unless you just go and live in the woods and don't bother anybody, but then you, like the guy in Maine, you have to steal. You have to do things to get to eat, you know. And I want to also put this question forward. Like, does it matter why we have to be good people? Does it matter? This talk isn't just like, oh, let's all be nice to each other, but if it's an outcome that we want, where, you know, things are better moving in a better direction, things are improving as a society, like question the, or I don't question it, but I want to make sure we really talk about if it matters even why people are behaving ethically or not. Clockwork Orange, where you're just forced to behave ethically, and I think that's wrong. But on the other side of it, we all have this really innate understanding of what it means, and I think that's unrealistic too, because that's just people to care about anything in the first place, let alone something that is really, really difficult. So let's take the specifics here. Let's take the simplest example here of just technology, which is just like buying a laptop and what that involves. Like that involves transport to get to and from the store. That involves the laptop to have been manufactured, which if you trace the chains of the supply chains back to some sort of or whatever, even if those are really heavily audited. Like I bought an HP because they had the best ranking, but it was like a B. It wasn't even like an A. It was like, oh, they're all right. You know, I'm like, okay, you know, I need a computer. I can't function without a computer, like both just like as a person messing around on YouTube on the internet and in my professional life, like no. And, you know, in order to not make that choice, I have to just pick a different profession. And that's, no. So, you know, move up to, okay, I want a website, so I go to the easiest and simplest thing, which is like HostGator or GoDaddy, and I just pay $5 a month so I can have a WordPress blog. Well, guess what? That's data that you have to protect. That's infrastructure that is arguably GoDaddy's job to protect, but if you put in a bad WordPress plugin or a Drupal module or something like that, end up becoming part of a botnet that, like last October, takes out like the entire eastern seaboard of the internet. You know, or you buy an IoT device that's not protected. Like there's stuff that you have to be aware of. You know, and it's not your fault. It's not one's fault. It's there's a lack of education about this stuff. There's you know, there's reasons why there's a lot of horse blinders around this stuff. So I think there's an ethical landscape. And I think I tried to draw a map of this earlier, and I was like, I'm just going to talk about it. You know, I think you have corporations which are right now overshadowing government in terms of their power and in terms of what they are allowed and not allowed to do because they can influence law. And in our society, if you can influence law, you are at least some of the most powerful, if not the most powerful people. So government's encapsulated there, but when I drew the circles, it was like corporations and then government down here. But then sprinkled all throughout that is us, is the users. And I think right now, to describe it glibly, we have a situation where users are like fodder. They're like cattle just being fed into this machine where our data is being harvested and where it's being sold back to advertisers and things like that. And that's not an exaggeration. Like name any website that you get to use for free to like have a good time online with your friends, which is what we all want. And it is that, you know, unless, again, you compromise, unless you use diaspora. And then diaspora is a great example, actually, because it's one of those things where you just say, okay, well, I'll do this, and that'll be more ethical. And you're like, oh, wait, but that happened. Like, you know, diaspora was that anonymous version of Facebook that just ISIS ended up using, you know. And there's barriers here. It's expensive. It requires training, it requires forethought, all these different things. It puts you at a disadvantage, like straight up. These that behave unethically make more money. It's you know, because they can cut corners, because they're okay with cutting corners and things like that. And, you know, it's futile, and participation in society is murder, so why even bother? Which is, come on. It's true, but there's a balance there that you can strike, like, you know, getting the B version of the computer rather than the F kind of thing. And it's mostly long term. You don't see, you know, immediate gratifying results from a daily ethical choice that you make, even in the design or in code. or things like that. But there is, there's subsets of the ethical practice, and one of them is something called normative ethics, which is just how you use ethical knowledge to make decisions in life. And I think that's really what we need to just move towards. And in the long term, it's going to pan out. So let's do another easy example, thought experiment here. Bill Gates v. Steve Jobs. And, there's a disclaimer at the bottom. This is not a claim that because somebody does something really bad and then they do something really good, that just magically balances out and everything's fine. And, there's not that type of calculus, but it's which is somebody that does only bad things and then somebody does all bad things and then one really good thing is probably quantitatively better than somebody who just only does bad things. Not balanced it out. It doesn't make it okay. So on the right, we have Steve Jobs, who, again, just to be sarcastic, tricked us all into thinking that we needed to buy stuff that we didn't need to buy, and opened up a bunch of factories in China, and used conflict minerals to create products that made us addicted to them or whatever. Bill Gates did all those things as well, but he has the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and they arguably have kids' lives or whatever. So that's just the example there. All right, just a show of hands here for the next slide. Oh, yeah, go.
Not to mention, if I may say, the egregious injustice that he's done by promoting Microsoft Windows on this.
in fighting and infecting us with Microsoft Windows and Windows 10.
MS-DOS, may I say MS-DOS, which is truly still the engine underneath it.
Oh yeah. It's true.
And the terrible things he's doing regarding education, which I think people will discover in the next 10 or 15 years. The immense standards that Bill Gates has done in education.
I would love to hear more about that. I don't know about that, and afterwards you should tell me about that. That sounds interesting.
Intellectual property theft.
Which they both did to Xerox. So this is yeah.
When Microsoft basically killed Java. I mean, they basically killed it, but.
Yeah. Well, Java's back. We got Java 8. It's strong.
It was back to Java. I don't know if you remember it's
Yeah.
I don't want to.
But no, it's okay, because that's just the thing. Like, if you go back to the laptop example, it's like, all right, well, how am I going to get to the store? It's like, well, I'm going to take the bus, but that still emits carbon, and I need to do this other thing, and then it's impossible. I really do think, and that's my.
I don't know what dirty shenanigans that those sons of guns did,
But
if you'll remember, they had an antitrust ruling against them. And it was only by the slimmest of margins that they argued their way out, and they had that nullified after the fact. God, a lot of money to do that.
Have you watched his deposition tapes during that process? You go on YouTube; they're all there, and you can just watch Bill Gates getting deposed, and it's. He just acts bored, and he's like, maybe, did you email each other about Internet Explorer and how you're gonna just crush the competition and stuff? He's like, there might have been that. I don't know. It's.
Look at what, I don't know if you're aware, but the machinations that HTML went through to work after Internet Explorer basically blessed all this
Actually
structured HTML code and compromised the standards. They never.
I'm glad you said that, because this is a slide make, but I think in the practice of this and in examining this, you realize that nobody thinks they're the bad guy.
Yes.
That's the thing, is that at the time, Internet Explorer 6, which is what you're referring to, because there was just massive deviation from the standard, was the most advanced browser at the time. Before Firefox was released, before the standards compliant browsers became a thing, that was they were
What was it like?
at the time. Yeah. All right, I'm gonna move on. If that's okay. It's true. It is my fault. How many people here are themselves know somebody or know a friend or a family member who has a disability? Every hand in this room should go up. Every single hand in this room should go up. Yeah, I know. I think one of the easiest ethical wins you can do in tech is just practice accessibility, know the accessibility standards. Like I don't want to chirp on this too long, but so many just simple things you can do when you're creating an interface to just make it easier. And it's not just about visual impairment or anything like that. There's ways to design for dementia by constantly reminding the user what they're doing and where they are and why they're doing what they're doing. Any other thing, there's impairment, any cognitive impairment, there's ways to do that and not compromise your interface or your software. Okay. Here's another claim. Is that we are relinquishing decision-making processes to computers now. There's literally something called predictive policing, real estate. There's all these different things that, if you go all the way back to the trolley problem, there's self-driving cars now. There are automatic trolleys running around, and some poor programmer is going to have to sit down and code those rules into the system. That's going to fall on a human being to teach a computer that if you're driving and there's a family or a woman in a stroller over here and a man over here and the driver, and you have to choose between what happens to all those people, at least get the computer on a path so it can learn how to do that decision. Yeah. Bring it.
Singular. But if they're mob programming, you need as many people in that process. In a collective group.
Swarm intelligence, yes.
And they collectively can facilitate, hopefully, a solution that is far better than any single program.
That is a really good proposed solution, I will say. I don't know that is the solution, but can I explain to the group? Yeah. I think what you're describing is something that's formally called swarm intelligence, and they used it's a Ouija board, is really what it is. Let me finish the analogy, and then so you get a group of experts in, or just a group of anybody, and you sort of nudge the system towards a solution. And using this, they were able to guess the the first 10 horses of the Kentucky Derby, like just straight up, like. And if you gave it to 100 people and asked them to do it, they would give the wrong answer. But then if you give it to the group, they would give it perfectly.
But can we please use a deterministic rather than a probabilistic analogy?
Can you? I can't. No. Deterministic, like.
I didn't read the book, but there was a book about collecting intelligence, and what they found is like if you put a jar of jawbreakers, this big. And you take the average that, some people dress way high and way low, but collectively, the average would be very close to the correct number of, but it's deterministic. It's not like which horse is going to win.
Right.
And another analogy is fear. A bull. Let's say, how much does bull weigh? Well, 99% of people know nothing about how much a bull weighs, but again, if you average the collective input,
it will resolve to kind of the correct answer. Yeah, I mean, I think that is something worth exploring and something worth trying in these moral frameworks, because we don't have a quantitative or a good quantitative.
We have an underlying basis that makes it make sense. Watson, for example, is really good at solving Jeopardy puzzles.
Yeah.
And it's because it basically is doing word association statistics. But if you gave it puzzles that basically require solving a model or solving some sort of a framework where there's a deterministic model where you have to turn the crank and you tweak some aspect of it, you can't do those at all, because all it can do is word associations, basically.
Right.
So it's a one-trick pony in a certain sense.
Yes.
But that works really well for certain kinds of things.
Yeah.
I think that book you're talking about is the Vincent Crowd.
Yes.
Which is a really interesting book, but it doesn't help you get to how you solve the problem of whether the self-driving car that I'm driving in should save my life or the life of the pedestrian I'm about to hit. Right? If the choice is hit like some barrier and injure me or kill me, like the self-driving car is going to make that call.
Yeah, it has to.
And the thing is that how many jelly beans are in the jar is a knowable thing. right? The right answer between me and the pedestrian is a point of view.
But I think we're just talking about consensus, right? We just get a majority consensus on what the better thing to do is. But the problem is flawed by human psychology, because they did a survey and it was, you just asked the crowd, should the car kill the pedestrian or the driver? Most people are going to actually say the pedestrian. But if you're at the store buying a car, like, no, I want the thing to save me. Like,
Because you're going to think it's my kid driving.
Yeah,
Right?
or
Whatever.
Exactly.
The point is excellent. I take nothing away, but let me say, human beings are notorious for ignoring so many risk factors. If you bring a collective approach, it says, okay, if you're tired, if you're
Yeah, but it's a self-driving car. It's not my fault, right? I'm
Right.
sitting behind the wheel.
yeah.
I'm in this
So,
situation.
I'm saying that.
Yeah.
And I know we're talking
Fine.
about like problems,
It's fine.
like problem sets we're trying to solve on the other side of crowds too, where crowds are not always going to
I was
come.
just thinking about social media. I don't know how.
Oh no, we're gonna get there. Yeah.
I don't really want to go think about this for a minute.
Uh,
The point I want to make is that the probability is going to be so low that it's never going to have to make that choice.
So I think someone's just like the lowest common denominator.
Again, I think that's a good solution. I don't share your confidence in that is the solution, but I would encourage people to really explore that as an option, because that's one of the best that I've heard yet.
The other thing to say would be, when choosing the crowd that collectively influences the algorithm for the crash decision, who chooses that crowd? Because we can't have everyone vote. So now we're back to kind of.
And to bring it back to the slide here, when we're done with this conversation in 100 years, be coded in, and there will be no more discussion about, what. Yeah.
Nobody will realize it was.
To use a ready phrase, like